The crash landing. The crystalline spires pierced the violet sky like frozen lightning, their translucent surfaces refracting the light of 3 moons into rainbow cascades. Dr. Maya Torres had seen countless wonders during her decade of xenobiology research, but nothing like this. Of course, she'd also never crash-landed on an uncharted planet before, so this day was full of firsts. "Status report," she croaked, pressing her hand against the throbbing gash on her forehead. The ship's AI remained stubbornly silent. The impact must have knocked out more than just the propulsion systems. Maya unbuckled herself from the pilot's seat, wincing as her ribs protested the movement. The Starweaver's cabin was tilted at a 45-degree angle, making every step a precarious balancing act. Through the cracked viewscreen, she could see the path her ship had carved through the crystal forest, a jagged wound in an otherwise perfect landscape. The emergency kit was still secure in its compartment, thankfully. She pulled out the portable analyzer and took a quick reading of the atmosphere. To her surprise, it was not only breathable but had higher oxygen content than Earth. The real shock came when she analyzed the crystalline structures outside. "This can't be right," she muttered, double-checking the readings. The crystals were giving off biosignatures. They were alive. Maya suited up in her protective gear, more out of habit than necessity, given the breathable atmosphere, and prepared to exit the ship. The emergency beacon was damaged, but if she could get to higher ground, she might be able to boost the signal enough for the research station to locate her. The airlock hissed open, and Maya stepped out onto the crystal surface. Up close, the structures were even more remarkable. They seemed to pulse with an inner light that responded to her proximity. When she touched one cautiously with her gloved hand, ripples of bioluminescence spread out from the point of contact. "Fascinating," she breathed, already mentally composing her research paper. If she survived to write it. A sound like wind chimes drew her attention. The crystals were vibrating, creating harmonics that seemed to form patterns just beyond her understanding. The vibrations grew stronger, and Maya watched in amazement as the crystal formations began to shift and move, creating a path before her. "Welcome, seed bearer." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Maya spun around, her heart racing, and found herself face to face with something that defied explanation. The being stood nearly 7 feet tall, its body a seamless blend of crystalline structures and what appeared to be living plant matter. Its form was vaguely humanoid, but constantly shifting, like light through water. Where a face should be, there was a spiral pattern of smaller crystals that pulsed in time with its words. "I am Zenith," the being continued, its voice a chorus of harmonics. "Guardian of the Crystal Garden. And you, Maya Torres, have been chosen." Maya took an involuntary step backward, her scientific mind racing to categorize what she was seeing. "How do you know my name?" "The garden knows many things," Zenith replied, moving closer with liquid grace. "It has been waiting for one like you. A bridge between worlds. A catalyst for change." The surrounding crystals pulsed brighter, and Maya felt a strange resonance in her bones, as if her very cells were responding to some unheard frequency. She wanted to run, to hide in her ship until rescue came, but something held her transfixed. The same curiosity that had driven her to explore the furthest reaches of space now demanded she understand what was happening. "What do you mean, chosen?" she asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Chosen for what?" Zenith's crystalline face spiraled into what might have been a smile. "To join with the garden, of course. To become part of something greater than yourself. But first, you must be tested." The ground beneath Maya's feet began to shift, crystal spires rising and falling like waves in an alien sea. She struggled to maintain her balance as the landscape rearranged itself around her. "The tests will begin now," Zenith announced, already beginning to fade into the crystalline background. "Remember, Maya Torres, the garden responds not to force, but to harmony. Not to fear, but to understanding." "Wait." Maya called out, but Zenith had vanished, leaving her alone in the ever-shifting crystal maze. The path back to her ship had disappeared, replaced by towering walls of living crystal that hummed with barely contained energy. She took a deep breath, studying the patterns of light flowing through the structures around her. She was a scientist, trained to observe and analyze. If this was a test, then there had to be rules, patterns she could understand. The crystals pulsed, creating a rhythm that seemed to match her heartbeat. As she focused on it, she began to notice subtle variations, like a language she could almost understand. This wasn't just a maze, it was a conversation. Maya squared her shoulders and began to walk forward. Whatever these tests were, whatever the crystal garden wanted from her, she would face it with the same determination that had carried her across the stars. She just hoped she wouldn't regret her curiosity this time. The first test was about to begin, and somewhere in the crystalline labyrinth, Zenith watched with ancient, alien interest to see if this human would prove worthy of the garden's choice. The garden's test. The crystal walls pulsed with increasing intensity as Maya made her way deeper into the maze. Each step sent ripples of light cascading through the translucent structures, creating patterns that seemed just on the edge of comprehensibility. Her scientific mind raced to catalog every detail, even as her instincts screamed at her to find a way out. The garden speaks in rhythms, Zenith's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. Can you hear its song, Maya Torres? She paused, closing her eyes to focus on the subtle vibrations running through the crystal floor. There was a pattern there, something almost musical in its regularity. It's like a heartbeat, she said, but more complex. Multiple rhythms overlapping. Good. Zenith materialized beside her, its crystalline form catching and refracting the ambient light. The first test is one of perception. Many before you saw only walls and barriers. They fought against the garden's nature, trying to impose their will upon it. Maya opened her eyes, studying the shifting patterns with renewed interest. They tried to solve it like a traditional maze, didn't they? But that's not what this is at all. The crystal being's face spiraled in what she was beginning to recognize as approval. What do you see, then? It's more like a circulatory system, Maya said, watching the pulses of light flow through the transparent walls. The patterns aren't random, they're carrying information, energy. The whole structure is alive. She reached out to touch one of the walls, and this time, instead of just observing the resulting light show, she paid attention to the rhythm of the pulses. They matched the beating of her own heart. The garden responds to life, she continued, excitement overshadowing her fear. It's trying to synchronize with my biological rhythms, establish some kind of connection. Very good, Zenith hummed, the sound creating harmonics in the surrounding crystals. But understanding is only the first step. Now you must learn to communicate. The ground beneath Maya's feet suddenly became transparent, revealing depths that seemed to go on forever. Layers upon layers of crystal structures stretched downward, all pulsing with that same complex rhythm. The sight made her dizzy, and she struggled to maintain her balance. Your kind relies so heavily on words, Zenith observed. But the garden speaks in resonance, in harmony. Show us you can listen with more than just your ears. Maya forced herself to stay calm, drawing on years of scientific training. Guide me, she said. How do I begin? Instead of answering directly, Zenith placed one crystalline hand on the wall. The pulses of light immediately changed their pattern, becoming more organized, almost like. It's a symphony, Maya breathed. Each pulse is a note, each pattern a phrase. She placed her own hand next to Zenith's, watching how the light responded differently to her touch. Where Zenith's contact created perfect, harmonious patterns, her touch caused disruptions, like discordant notes in the crystal's song. Your rhythms are chaos, Zenith said, but there was no judgment in its tone. Human life is brief, intense, full of contradictions. The garden's song has remained unchanged for millennia. To pass this test, you must find balance between these extremes. Maya closed her eyes again, focusing on her breathing, her heartbeat. She thought about the complex rhythms of life on Earth, the tides, the seasons, the migration patterns she'd studied as a biologist. Everything in nature had its own rhythm, its own song. Slowly, deliberately, she began to tap her fingers against the crystal wall, matching the garden's bass rhythm but adding subtle variations. The light responded, shifting and changing with each touch. She opened her eyes to see the patterns around her transforming, becoming more complex but also more harmonious. Yes, Zenith encouraged. Let the garden teach you its language. For what felt like hours, Maya experimented with different rhythms, learning how the crystal structures responded to various touches and patterns. Sometimes she would find a harmony that made the entire section glow with brilliant colors. Other times, her attempts would create dissonant ripples that set her teeth on edge. But gradually, she began to understand. The garden wasn't just responding to physical touch, it was responding to intention, to emotion, to the very electrical impulses of her nervous system. The garden isn't just alive, she said finally, watching the lights dance under her fingers. It's conscious. This whole structure is one vast, interconnected mind. And now you begin to understand why you were chosen, Zenith replied. Your species possesses something unique, a capacity for rapid adaptation, for understanding patterns that are utterly alien to your experience. The garden has been watching humanity for a long time, waiting for one who could bridge the gap between our forms of consciousness. Maya turned to face the crystalline being, her mind racing with implications. But why me specifically? I'm just a xenobiologist. There are brilliant physicists, neurologists, musicians who could probably understand these patterns better than I can. The garden chooses based on potential, not current capability, Zenith said. And it sees something in you that even you do not yet recognize. But be warned, this was only the first test. The trials ahead will challenge more than just your ability to perceive and understand. As if on cue, the crystal walls began to shift again, but this time the movement was more dramatic. The floor beneath Maya's feet started to tilt, and the harmonious patterns she'd been creating turned chaotic. The second test begins now, Zenith announced, already beginning to fade away. Remember what you have learned about harmony, Maya Torres. You will need it to survive what comes next. Wait. Maya called out. What am I supposed to do? But Zenith was gone, and the crystal maze was transforming around her. The walls were no longer transparent but had taken on a deep, opaque purple hue. The familiar pulses of light had become erratic, threatening. The air itself seemed to crackle with energy. Maya took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She had passed the first test by understanding the garden's basic nature. But as the environment continued to transform around her, becoming increasingly hostile, she realized that understanding might not be enough to survive what was coming. The crystal floor cracked beneath her feet, and Maya began to run, her heart pounding in rhythm with the garden's increasingly frantic pulses. The second test had begun, and somewhere in the vast crystalline consciousness surrounding her, both Zenith and the garden itself watched to see how she would face this new challenge. This test, she suspected, would require more than just observation and harmony. As the crystal maze transformed into something more threatening, Maya realized she was about to discover exactly why the garden had chosen her, and whether she was truly worthy of that choice. The awakening. The crystal maze had become a nightmare of fractured light and discordant harmonies. Maya ran through corridors that shifted and changed with each step, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The second test had pushed her physical endurance to its limits, forcing her to navigate an environment that seemed determined to shatter her along with itself. But something wasn't right. Even through her exhaustion, Maya's scientific mind noticed patterns that shouldn't exist. The crystal structures weren't just challenging her, they were degrading. She skidded to a halt as a massive crystal spire crashed down before her, its surface covered in what looked like dark veins. The corruption spread visibly across its surface, turning the once transparent crystal into something opaque and sickly. Now you see. Zenith's voice carried none of its usual ethereal harmony. Instead, it sounded strained, almost pained. The garden is dying. The crystalline being materialized beside her, but its form was different now. Dark patches marred its previously perfect surface, and its movements were less fluid, more jerky. This isn't part of the test, is it? Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. The corruption I'm seeing, it's real. Yes. Zenith placed a hand against one of the walls, and Maya watched in horror as the darkness seemed to pulse in response. It began centuries ago, a slow decay in the garden's deepest roots. We thought we could contain it, but it grows stronger with each passing cycle. Maya's mind raced, analyzing the problem like she would any biological system. It's spreading like a virus, using the garden's own network against it. The more connected everything is, the faster it can travel. Precisely. Zenith turned to face her, its crystalline features arranged in what she now recognized as an expression of deep sorrow. This is why the garden has been searching. Why it chose you. Me. What could I possibly do against something like this? Even as she spoke, Maya found herself reaching out to touch one of the corrupted crystals. The surface felt wrong, not just physically, but on some deeper level she couldn't quite explain. Your DNA, Zenith said simply. Human genetic code contains patterns we have never seen before. Patterns of adaptation, of rapid evolution in response to threats. The garden believes these patterns, properly integrated, could help it fight the corruption. Maya withdrew her hand, mind spinning with implications. You want to use human DNA as a template to help the garden evolve. That's incredible. But also incredibly dangerous. The interaction between two such different forms of life could be catastrophic. More catastrophic than the death of an entire world. Zenith gestured, and the crystal walls around them became transparent, revealing the true scope of the corruption. Dark veins spread through the garden structure like cancer, pulsing with malevolent energy. How long? Maya asked, her scientist's mind already calculating possibilities. At the current rate of spread, the garden will reach critical failure within one planetary rotation. Zenith's form flickered, as if the effort of maintaining its physical manifestation was becoming too great. The corruption will reach the core, and everything, all the knowledge, all the consciousness contained within the garden, will be lost forever. Maya pressed her hand against one of the few remaining clear crystal sections, feeling the desperate rhythm of the garden's song. There have been others before me, haven't there? Other humans you've tested? Yes. Zenith's voice carried the weight of countless failures. Many were physically compatible, but none could achieve the necessary mental resonance with the garden. None could truly understand its nature as you have begun to. And what happened to them? Those who tried to help, did not survive the attempt. Zenith moved closer, its corrupted form casting strange shadows. The garden's consciousness is vast, Maya Torres. To link with it fully, to allow your genetic pattern to be read and integrated, the human mind was not designed to handle such connection. Maya thought of her crashed ship, of the research station that might or might not be looking for her. She thought of all her careful scientific studies, her dreams of understanding alien life. Nothing had prepared her for this moment of choice. Show me, she said finally. Show me exactly what's happening to the garden. If I'm going to make this decision, I need to understand everything. Zenith raised both hands, and suddenly the crystal maze around them transformed. Maya found herself floating in what seemed to be a vast neural network, streams of light and information flowing in complex patterns all around her. But through it all ran those dark veins of corruption, spreading like cracks in a pane of glass. The garden is more than just a collection of crystal formations, Zenith explained, its voice echoing in this strange space. It is a living library, a repository of knowledge gathered over millions of years. Every species that has ever evolved on this world, every consciousness that has ever joined with the garden, their memories, their experiences, their very essence is preserved here. Maya watched in fascination as images formed in the streams of light, countless alien life forms, civilizations, scientific discoveries. It's not just a garden, she breathed. It's an archive of evolution itself. Yes. And now it is all in danger of being lost. Zenith's form seemed to pulse with urgency. The corruption isn't just destroying the physical structure, it's erasing information, consuming consciousness itself. Each moment that passes, more knowledge is lost forever. As if to emphasize this point, a nearby stream of light suddenly turned dark and disappeared, its contents devoured by the spreading corruption. Maya felt the loss like a physical pain, though she couldn't have said exactly what knowledge had just been destroyed. If I agree to help, she said slowly, what exactly would I have to do? You would need to join fully with the garden's consciousness, Zenith explained. Your mind would have to open completely to its vast network, allowing your genetic pattern to be read and integrated at the deepest level. The process would rewrite the garden's basic structure, using human adaptability as a template to fight the corruption. And the chances of my mind surviving such a connection? Zenith's silence was answer enough. Maya closed her eyes, feeling the desperate rhythm of the garden's song all around her. She was a scientist, trained to observe and analyze, not to take potentially fatal risks. But she was also human, and humans had a long history of doing the impossible when the stakes were high enough. I need to see one more thing, she said, opening her eyes. Show me what happens if the garden dies. Show me the consequences. The vision that Zenith shared next would help Maya make her decision, though whether it would lead to salvation or sacrifice remained to be seen. The choice. The vision Zenith shared was apocalyptic in scale. Maya watched in horror as the corruption reached the garden's core, triggering a cascade of destruction that spread across the entire planet. The crystal structures that had taken millions of years to grow shattered like glass, taking with them countless eons of accumulated knowledge and consciousness. But it wasn't just the loss of information that horrified her. As the garden died, so too did the delicate balance it maintained. The planet's ecosystem, it seemed, was intimately linked with the crystal network. Without it, everything would collapse. Enough, Maya whispered, and the vision faded. They were back in the maze, surrounded by the ever-spreading corruption. I understand now. But before I make my decision, I need to know about the others. Show me what happened to them. Zenith's form flickered, reluctance evident in its posture. Are you certain? Their fates were not peaceful. I'm a scientist, Maya replied firmly. I need all the data before I can make an informed decision. The crystal walls around them shifted again, this time revealing what looked like memorial chambers. In each, Maya could see a perfect crystal reproduction of a human figure, frozen in various poses of determination or agony. 27, Zenith said softly. 27 humans have been chosen by the garden over the centuries. Each agreed to attempt the connection. Each failed in their own way. Maya moved closer to examine one of the crystal statues. It was a woman, perhaps in her 40s, wearing what looked like a centuries-old spacesuit design. Her face was captured in an expression of intense concentration. Dr. Elena Martinez, Zenith provided. She was the first. A brilliant physicist who believed she could quantify the garden's consciousness in mathematical terms. She maintained her connection for almost 3 minutes before her mind shattered. Moving to the next statue, Maya saw a younger man in more modern attire. His crystal form was reaching out, as if trying to grasp something just beyond reach. James Chen. He came closest to success. His mind adapted quickly to the garden's patterns, but... Zenith paused. The corruption was weaker then. We thought we had more time. He pushed too hard, tried to process too much information at once. The feedback loop destroyed both his consciousness and a significant portion of the garden's network. Maya continued through the memorial, studying each figure, each failure. Some had died instantly upon connection. Others had lasted longer but suffered devastating mental breakdown. A few had simply disappeared into the garden's consciousness, their minds lost in its vast network. "Why show me this?" she asked finally, though she thought she knew the answer. "Why not just tell me the risks?" "Because you deserve to understand exactly what you're choosing," Zenith replied. "And because you need to see what they all had in common, and how you're different." Maya turned to face the crystalline being. "Different how?" "Look at them. Really look. What do you see?" She turned back to the crystal statues, studying them with a scientist's eye for detail. They were diverse in age, ethnicity, and era, but as she examined their frozen expressions and poses, a pattern emerged. "They were all trying to control it," she said slowly. "The physicist trying to quantify it, the others, they all approached it as something to be mastered or solved." She thought back to her own experiences with the garden, how she had learned to harmonize with its rhythms rather than impose her own. "Yes." Zenith's tone carried approval. They saw the garden as a problem to be solved, a system to be dominated. "None truly understood its nature as you have begun to." "Because I'm not trying to control it," Maya realized. "I'm trying to understand it, to work with it rather than impose my will upon it." "Precisely. The garden is not a tool or a machine. It is life itself, evolved over millions of years into something vast and complex. The connection it seeks cannot be forced or controlled, it must be a harmony, a partnership." The corruption pulsed around them, its dark tendrils creeping ever closer. Maya could feel the garden's song becoming more desperate, its rhythms increasingly chaotic. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Hours at most. The corruption has reached critical mass. Once it penetrates the core, nothing will be able to stop its spread." Maya pressed her hand against one of the clearer crystal sections, feeling the familiar resonance. She thought about all the knowledge contained within the garden, the countless species and civilizations whose memories would be lost forever if it died. She thought about the planet's ecosystem, dependent on this vast crystalline network for survival. But she also thought about her own life, her research, the family waiting for her back on Earth. 27 others had tried and failed. What made her think she could succeed where they had not? "There's something else you haven't told me," she said suddenly, turning back to Zenith. "Something about what happens if I succeed." The crystalline being's form shifted, its patterns becoming more complex. "If you succeed, the integration would be complete. Your consciousness would become part of the garden, your human DNA providing the template for its evolution. You would not die, exactly, but you would no longer exist as you are now." "I would become like you," Maya said, understanding dawning. "A guardian." "Yes. But one born of human consciousness, human adaptability. The garden believes this hybrid nature might be the key to fighting the corruption. But the transformation, it would be absolute. There would be no returning to your former life." The choice lay before her now, clear and terrible. Risk everything, her mind, her identity, her very humanity, in an attempt to save this alien archive of evolution. Or walk away, knowing she had condemned an entire world to death. Maya looked once more at the crystal statues, these monuments to human courage and failure. Then she looked at her own reflection in the crystal wall, distorted by the spreading corruption. "Show me," she said finally. "Show me exactly what I need to do." The time for testing was over. Now came the moment of transformation, if she survived it. The transformation. The heart of the garden was a chamber vast beyond comprehension. Crystal spires rose like cathedral pillars into infinite darkness above, while beneath the transparent floor, layers of crystalline neural networks pulsed with failing light. The corruption had reached even here, dark veins spreading across the once pristine surfaces like cracks in ancient ice. "The process must begin immediately," Zenith said, leading Maya to the chamber's center. A single crystal platform rose from the floor, its surface unmarred by the surrounding decay. "Once the connection is initiated, you must not resist. Any attempt to fight the garden's consciousness will result in failure. Maya thought of the memorial chamber, of 27 souls who had tried and failed to do what she was about to attempt. What exactly should I expect? The garden will attempt to synchronize with your consciousness first, Zenith explained. You will experience everything. Every memory, every consciousness stored within the network. The challenge will be maintaining your sense of self while allowing the connection to form. And that's where the others failed. They either fought it or lost themselves in it. Yes. The human mind is not designed to process such vast amounts of information. But your ability to harmonize with the garden's rhythm suggests you might be able to surf the wave, as your kind might say, rather than being overwhelmed by it. Maya stepped onto the platform, feeling the crystal's resonance through her boots. The corruption was spreading faster now, tendrils of darkness creeping across the chamber's walls like hungry fingers. The genetic integration will begin once consciousness synchronization is achieved, Zenith continued. Your DNA will be read at the quantum level, its patterns of adaptation copied and distributed throughout the garden's network. This will allow the garden to evolve, to develop new defenses against the corruption. And I'll become something else. Maya watched her reflection in the crystal surface, wondering if it would be the last time she saw herself as human. You will become more than what you are, while still remaining fundamentally yourself. Zenith's form flickered, the corruption affecting even its ability to maintain physical coherence. But we must begin. The garden's core systems are failing. Maya took a deep breath, centering herself. What do I need to do? Lie down. Open your mind to the garden's song. Remember what you learned about harmony. And Maya. Zenith's voice softened. Thank you. She lay back on the crystal platform, which was surprisingly warm against her skin. Above her, the vast darkness seemed to pulse with hidden light, like stars waiting to be born. Beginning synchronization, Zenith announced. The first wave of connection hit Maya like a tsunami of pure consciousness. Millions of alien memories flooded her mind, births, deaths, discoveries, extinctions, all the accumulated experiences of countless species across eons of evolution. She gasped, instinctively trying to process, to categorize, to understand. Don't fight it, Zenith's voice seemed to come from impossibly far away. Don't try to control it. Flow with it. Maya forced herself to relax, to stop trying to analyze everything she was experiencing. Instead, she let the memories wash through her like water, neither fighting nor trying to hold on to them. She became aware of the garden's song, more complex and beautiful than she had ever imagined, and let her consciousness move in harmony with it. The second wave brought deeper connection. She could feel the garden's vast neural network as if it were an extension of her own nervous system. She sensed the corruption now, not just as a visual phenomenon but as wrong notes in the garden's song, discordant harmonies that threatened to shatter the entire symphony. Genetic integration beginning, she heard Zenith say, though she wasn't sure if the words were spoken or thought. Pain lanced through every cell in Maya's body as the garden began reading her DNA. She felt herself being taken apart and reassembled at the quantum level, her very essence being copied and distributed throughout the crystalline network. The corruption responded, attacking more aggressively, sensing the threat of change. Maya screamed, but the sound came out as pure crystalline resonance. Her consciousness expanded, stretched, transformed. She was herself, but she was also the garden. She could feel every crystal, every stored memory, every pulse of energy through the vast network. And she could feel the corruption, understand it now for what it was, not an external attack but a manifestation of stagnation, of the garden's inability to evolve and adapt to a changing universe. Her human DNA, with its built-in capacity for rapid adaptation, was like a key unlocking doors that had been sealed for millions of years. The transformation accelerated. Maya felt her physical form beginning to change, flesh and blood restructuring into crystalline patterns that echoed her human DNA. But unlike the previous 27, she neither fought the change nor lost herself to it. Instead, she directed it, using her scientist's understanding of evolution and adaptation to guide the process. The corruption attacked again, trying to disrupt the transformation. But Maya's consciousness, now spread throughout the garden's network, responded with human adaptability. Where the corruption brought stagnation, she brought change. Where it sought to destroy connections, she created new ones. It's working, Zenith's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. The garden is evolving. Maya opened eyes that were no longer human and saw the world through crystalline senses. The corruption was retreating, unable to maintain its hold against the garden's newly evolved defenses. The crystal structures around her were changing, becoming more complex, more adaptable, while still maintaining their essential nature. She stood, her new form rising like liquid light, and felt the power of her transformation. She was Maya Torres, xenobiologist and explorer, but she was also something new, a bridge between human consciousness and the garden's vast intelligence. "How do you feel?" Zenith asked, its own form seeming dim compared to her radiance. "I feel." Maya's voice rang with crystalline harmonics. "I feel like myself, but more. I can sense everything, understand everything." She reached out, touching a nearby crystal surface, and watched as patterns of light danced in response. The corruption isn't just retreating. It's being transformed, integrated into the garden's new patterns of evolution. "You have done what we thought impossible," Zenith said. "You have given the garden the ability to adapt, to evolve. Your human consciousness, your understanding of change as a positive force rather than a threat, has transformed our entire world." Maya moved through the chamber, marveling at how she could sense every aspect of the garden's vast consciousness while maintaining her own identity. The memories and knowledge of countless species were available to her now, not as an overwhelming flood but as a library she could access at will. "There will be others," she said, knowing it with certainty. "Other humans who might be compatible. The garden can be more selective now, more understanding of what qualities to look for." "And you will help guide them," Zenith replied. "As you have guided the garden's evolution." Maya looked up through the crystal spires, seeing not just the physical structures but the infinite patterns of information and consciousness they contained. Her human curiosity and desire to understand had not diminished with her transformation, if anything, they had grown stronger. "The universe is so much larger than we imagined," she said, her voice carrying the harmonics of her new nature. "There's so much more to explore, to understand." And in the transformed garden, where crystal consciousness met human adaptability, a new chapter in evolution had begun. Maya Torres, no longer fully human but not lost to alien consciousness either, stood ready to guide both her old species and her new home toward whatever wonders awaited in the vast unknown.